Topic
All right.
numero dos. I think is one that our students in particular will feel a little more vividly than anybody else will. So I've been hearing a lot about these surveillance tools, techniques, programs, whatever.
Yeah.
Particularly, and I've actually heard that some of them are being used at my own institution to monitor students while they take exams. Basically, like in-home surveillance, so that
Yeah.
you have to have your video camera on, so that it can be determined that you're not cheating.
Mhm.
And I may be reading too far into what I saw from academic Twitter, but it appears as though there's also a version of this that requires access to your screen so that it
Yeah.
knows you're not tabbing out of your browser,
Yep.
so you're not cheating during an exam.
Mhm.
This combined with like the contact tracing that you're experiencing at your job, and similar
Yeah.
things that I've heard. Connecticut's now rolling out a Bluetooth app that helps you determine whether or not you've been in close proximity to somebody who's tested positive for COVID. We're all being expected to sort of buy into these technologies that
Mhm.
are increasingly invasive.
Yeah.
I think the term that I saw used by Angela Jones was carceral logic,
Mhm.
right? That like we are being forced into a sort of like panoptic prison, and we're expected to just kind of acquiesce willingly to be
Right.
like, yes, this is necessary, and to some extent, like some of it is. Part of my apprehension with it is the hesitance on the part of the creators, distributors, proponents who are failing to admit that there is going to be an invasion of privacy aside from the one they're asking you to agree to. Specifically in
Yeah.
the
And
context of the one that in Connecticut, like their statement said, like, we will not take any other data from you. We just need to ping your phone off of someone else's phone via Bluetooth to let you know that you were in contact with somebody.
right.
But I know, as a media scholar, that that's not true. That you have no control, and you probably already signed agreements to what happens to that data that's inevitably being collected by that program, because it
And
doesn't just disappear.
you've likely contractually, like when I think about the paperwork, like here, when a student matriculates, they agree to have their likeness used by the school.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's just part and parcel of matriculation. Now, is that insidious? No, right? It's like pictures of sports teams, right? And like when we try and hype up a game, like most of it is actually like super rad and super fun. Now it did come back and it bit us in the ass because one of the things that came up in our own Black App page was, well, we're all over the marketing material, but look at the stories that we tell about what it's like to actually be here,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so there is something dark there, but I'm willing to bet that particularly at college, at universities, right? When we're talking about 5, 10, 20, 30, 60,000 people, that there are all kinds of like contractual acquiescence to privacy invasion, like to the breaches of privacy, digital privacy, that even precede COVID, that come well before COVID hit, that most of us, I'm willing to bet, are totally unaware of. And with this, so when I saw this on the notes yesterday, I started digging around, or this morning, or whatever it was. I started digging around and seeing what I can find. And I'll say proudly that, like in the spring, in last spring, this past spring, we were very clear. Like, look, unless you're making your exams open note, like we can't ensure the integrity of an exam the way we could conventionally in person.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you want to give exams, they've got to be open note. And you can modify your exam however you want to account for that strategy, but we're not about to do this, right? We're not about to have some kind of like third party software. And what's interesting about like licensing too is that the agreement, like, you're not the end user, the university is.
Yep.
And so the agreement, like, the university is making an agreement with this software developer on your behalf. And so my understanding is, like, none of this is like at the kernel level of your machine, but from what I gather, we're talking about like audio and video control, raw browser data that's then being kicked back to the university. And so really, like, they're not proctoring instruments. They're literally only data gathering machines under the brand name of proctoring. And then some of them, I guess, have like a human user on the backside. So like I read this story of this young woman who was like having a ton of anxiety about an exam, like an end of term exam, and the human proctor who is on the back end on the developer side was like twirling her mouse around her screen. So she's trying to focus on this exam and doesn't even have control over her own mouse and is watching this damn cursor dance around while she's trying to focus on an exam that she's already anxious for. And
Dear
so it
Lord.
just it sounds so shitty. It sounds so shitty. And like, do I think that universities are going to like do something insidious with people's like Pornhub history? No. But that's not the point. That's not actually the point.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this argument, you get these like Bush-esque responses of like, well, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to worry about. And it's like, that's actually not the issue. The issue isn't what you're gathering. It's that you're gathering in the first place. It's that you're taking this metadata about me in the first place. And you've said this in previous episodes, like, we have no data rights. We literally have no data rights. All we have are licensing and user agreements, which are subject to change. We have no robust, enduring data rights in this country. And so when things like this happen, you're fucked. And then, when we talk about like the carceral, right? Like when we're really carrying this to the umpteenth degree, not merely about like having us become agents of our own surveillance by opening our digital lives to this kind of invasion. But when I think about like the biometric data that could be collected, right? Irises, facial structure, voice, right? Like I'm simply taking it on good faith that like, oh, my university's not using this, right? But then it makes me wonder, like, if I'm not the end user, the university's the end user, then I'm relying on like my tech department at my university to have been savvy enough to then make sure that like the data that's being collected by these like ProctorU, for example, isn't then being sold or used to market or whatever it is on the back end, right? And we've already talked about this, like, this is like these data gathering machines are just like it's just raw unfettered capitalism. They're just mining you, and that data is the product. The data is the product. And so all of this makes me like so fucking uncomfortable. And somewhere in France, Foucault is just like, I told you motherfuckers this shit was coming. It's biopolitics. I mean, it's pure biopolitics.
You're not wrong. We were foretold and we ignored all of the warning signs that would suggest that we were going to end up here.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's interesting is I think my biggest fear is what could come of how that data is going to be used.
Yeah,
by your university, by whoever else is going to be accessing that data. What sorts of modifications to student behavior they're going to attempt to make based on what they glean from how successful these programs are or aren't. Right? How are they going to be able to affect the student mindset, their approach to their learning, what materials are most accessible, what test practices and purposes are most efficient, right? Where can money be made by influencing students to do certain things as part of their regular academic practice? I think is what scares me the most, because as you mentioned in the anecdote, right, like students are already anxious about this stuff. They would be
Yeah.
anxious if they were doing it normally. They're more anxious doing these things at home without supervision, without the same amount of access to other students and faculty and resources. And now they're being made anxious by the fact that someone or something is monitoring them, learning from them, and adapting them to better suit the needs of the environment and not the other way around.
Mm.
Right? That one of the things that I
Yep.
think people miss about why this omnipresent, ubiquitous surveillance is so problematic is the environment isn't being changed to suit us. We are being changed to suit the environment so the environment's more profitable.
Right.
Everything is about changing our behavior.
Mhm.
And so when you think about students, and most of my students complain about how shitty this semester has been, bar none. They're like, I am not learning enough. Tests are harder, and we're being blamed for tests that have to be curved because it's our fault for not understanding the material. Is what they're telling me.
Mhm.
Not in my class because I don't give tests. Let's be very clear.
Me neither.
I'm not about that life. You write a paper in my class, you write well, you will do well. Those are the facts.
Come get roasted.
Yeah,
Like you can write better papers.
You can write better papers if you come. I should tell my students they want their papers roasted because I'm grading them shits right now. And so hearing that they're struggling so much with the current online learning environment and having heard all of this, preamble about how we're trying to adapt online learning to make it more sustainable, to make it more accessible, to build it into the regular operating system of the university, right? To make it a staple. Now that we've had to use it, that once we can return to some semblance of quote unquote normalcy, that online learning will remain part of the curriculum. Never mind the fact that it's interrupting people's ability to complete coursework, to get into graduate schools, whatever. This system of telling them that they have to be on their best behavior in an academic setting at home for consequences that they may not see anytime soon because it's going to be up to the discretion of the university, to me seems like an undue stressor that's going to affect the students with the least amount of access anyway.
Yeah.
That those who have to already get into precarious situations to access these online learning environments and then forfeit their rights without any understanding of what's going to happen or how it's going to work, right? And none of us do. It doesn't matter how educated you are, how much you know. Again, myself being a scholar of this stuff, I would need, and this is not an extrapolation, I would need a legion of attorneys. And I would need them to dedicate tens of thousands of hours to understanding all the shit that we agree to when we're told that we have to use this technology to finish our degrees or whatever.
Right.
And you're going to tell a young, non-white, impoverished student that they got to forfeit everything about themselves just so they can complete this class and get this credit, right? To then end up, like you said about students at Westtown, right? To be used for marketing materials, for other data analytics, and still be treated as lesser than, as to be unsupported, to be unaccounted for, as far as the institution is concerned. That's the part that really chaps my ass. Like, that drives me a little crazy.
Yeah. So then find yourself 4 years later, if you finish in 4 years, unbelievably indebted in a precarious economy as a member of a downwardly mobile cohort of America. Like, that fucking sucks.
Yeah, it's the worst joke ever told.
Yeah. Yeah. And when folks rightfully point out like university education is a fucking racket, this only compounds that sentiment, right? This only compounds the idea that the university degrees are just that, are extortion. They pull you deeper and deeper into the thresher of neoliberalism because right, these credentials are what allow you to play the game or play it at a different difficulty. Um, you know, in Borderlands we have Mayhem 10, right? Like the same thing. Like the drops are a little bit better once you complete the degree, but it's pure unfettered chaos.
Yep.
Um, and I don't know how a university student can feel really enthused about what they're doing right now. Or not even just enthused, but like feel even optimistic about anything, about what their education is supposed to give them, right? I'm one of those like, I want universities to serve a public good, right? To make active citizens, like not just good workers, but make people who care about democracy. And even there, we're falling short. And so I think, like this piece about like testing surveillance, I think the implications are huge and not merely about like exacerbating testing anxiety for kids who are learning under suboptimal conditions. I think the ramifications when we carry this to the nth degree are really grave for this country, are really, really grave for the US. Um, and as I think about my entering into the professoriate, right? It like in so many ways it increasingly feels like dirty fucking work. Like hitman level wet work.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't feel great.
This is
I'm
why I
both
don't want
victim
to.
and complicit.
This is why I don't want to join it. I'm honest, but the flip side, right, is that I'll inevitably probably end up in the tech industry, which is going to be just as bad. Because I have that feeling that being on this side of it, and maybe say like I end up at whoever, like a Blackboard or some company, right, trying to put like my academic skills to some use to be like, maybe we can
Mhm.
fix this so it doesn't suck so much for students to use.
Blackboard is
Um,
trash.
yeah, I mean, we all hate
LMSs are
different
trash.
LMSs are trash. You're right. But I'd feel just as bad being the person who's like, hey, maybe we can make these things like more equitable and more accessible, and we can maybe invade students' privacy a little bit less and give them a little more freedom to do what they want the way they would if they were on a campus and we're not just stalking them 24/7.
Mhm.
And I'd probably just be screaming to the void and be like, no, like you will help us further the plot of our machine learning so that it's more efficient at predicting the needs of the students so that we can predict the needs of our investors or whatever. I don't even know. I didn't get to look into it. I don't even know if these, you know, surveillance testing tools are free. Are they?
To the
'Cause
student, yes.
are they okay? If they're free to the student, that's
Yeah, it's
something.
it's it's all purchased by the university.
I mean, even that is problematic. But it would have been worse
Yeah.
if students were having to pay for their own surveillance to be like,
Yeah.
excuse me, can you turn on my camera for me and
Yeah.
watch me anxiously? Like, I can't, I don't force and I can't get students to turn their cameras on in my classroom. I don't
Mhm.
need them to. It
Yeah.
is hard to teach at a black square, but I don't need to be watching you learn. Right?
Right.
Like that's not the point of it.
Mhm.
It would be an attempt to mimic, the classroom environment, but it's not the same. And I know that.
Yeah.
So there's no need to force it. Um,
I definitely hate like teaching the black squares. And my approach has been like to just name it, to say, "Hey folks, there are 25 of us in the Zoom right now, but it feels like I'm talking to 5 of you. If you're able, it would really make a difference to those of us who are our cameras on, and probably to you too, to like be visible to us." And sometimes I'll get kids who like will PM me and they'll say, "Hey, like I'm finishing my bagel. I don't want you to like see me chewing or
mhm.
hear me chewing." Or I'll get a kid who like is like, "Hey, I got to babysit, my little sibling and they're acting a dang fool and I'm fixing breakfast. Like I'm here, I'm present, but I got stuff on my hands." Which also I think, when we think about like equity, I think about those working class kids, right? Who are right now like are taking out exorbitant loans to go to these colleges and universities, um, and are now being tasked with learning at home. But those like parental responsibilities, those like family responsibilities, don't go away. So imagine like some fucking program saying that this kid's cheating when what they're doing is feeding a younger sibling
Yep.
and putting them to play, and like as they're as they're like finessing the child, they're like coming back and answering a few more questions and then going and coming back and answering. Or maybe somebody's got an ailing parent, right? Maybe their parent's a fucking frontline worker. And that person caught COVID. So now they're taking care of an ailing parent, right? Maybe they're starting to show symptoms themselves. And what, you want them to pick up their fucking camera or their computer in most cases and what, panorama 360 to make sure they're not cheating?
Mm-hmm.
It's fucking absurd to me.
Yeah.
And it exacerbates like the gross inequities in learning and education that have always been there, but that COVID has just totally like blown the lid off. Working class kids, like as competent and capable as they are, do not have the same experience, particularly in the time of COVID. And bullshit like this only makes it worse.
Yeah. Aces Deuces says purchased by the university is the definition of not free.
Mm-hmm.
And other Reese says 3 of his students do that, teaching to an empty room every week, which is how I feel. I don't have any students turn on their cameras, not a single one.
Yeah.
And but you're right, Reese. There's it's as simple as students who don't have private space. You are automatically, by like objective computing standards of like if then statements, right? If you cannot physically be in a room in your house by yourself, that's not maybe like say the bathroom, which would be an inconvenience for everybody else if you're taking a an hour-long exam,
right?
There probably isn't private space for a lot of people. Like I know for a fact I've been in a lot of households in my lifetime with my parents, my families. There is no private space.
Yep. And especially like I'm thinking about like Hispanic homes that tend to be more multi-generational, where you've got like a great aunt or a great grandparent or a grandparent in the house. Like that shit gets chaotic and frenetic, right? And their gendered expectations about domestic labor and shit. Like, yo, you're not about, like, no way. There's no shot. You're not about to do that.
Yeah. One of my incoming freshman students over the summer, she'd ask questions and she'd have to excuse herself every couple of seconds. She'd be like, I'm sorry. I'm tending to my younger brother. I'm like, you're going to be sorry. I don't care.
Yeah.
But I understand, the frustration about that, that feels like an interference, an interruption.
Speaking of interference and interruption, can we just take a moment to acknowledge the fact that Luna jumped in the chat to ask about my late policy?
The late policy is don't be late. No, I'm kidding.
Hilarious.
I'm kidding. I don't know late policy.
Late to class or late to submission?
An important distinction.
It's 5% for every 24 hours after the deadline.
That is very specific. I like it. This is very specific.
That's pretty badass. They're pulling up to ask about a deadline. That is gangster. And
that's true.
And I will say, like, while she's here, Luna has an approach to the camera that I actually really appreciate. Luna's just like, I'm gonna learn where I'm at, and like you either take it or leave it. You know what I'm saying? And so like there are days where like Luna's like moving in her room, like getting ready for the day, and like she's attentive and paying it. You know what I'm saying? Like totally plugged in, but it's like, yo, I have a life to live,
right?
And I respect it, Or sometimes I've gotten kids who are like, Teacher Reese, I just woke up, but I'm here. I'm with the program. And I'm like, dog, like you do what you got to do. I'd rather, because the teaching to an empty room thing, is trash as an educator. I'm somebody, like, I teach in a big lecture hall. Well, big for us. And so I'm like Malcolm X in this motherfucker, like fire and brimstone and like
they're
pumped up.
Pretty sizable.
And I can't, what?
The classrooms. I've been in your
no. You haven't been in my lecture hall. The lecture hall, like compared to like an SU lecture hall that fits 450, mine is like very, very tiny. Mine fits maybe.
Was it not the one where your kids were doing presentations? Was that not what you would consider a lecture hall?
Yeah. Yes, that is the only lecture hall. That's a decent size.
Yeah, that's not bad.
I love that room. like I'm used to like moving around and like getting into it with my kids, and it's like, bro, I hit my like on days where I'm teaching in person, I hit my step counter before lunch. I'm at
Yeah,
10,000 steps before
I
lunch.
believe that.
Um, and so
I hit my step counter when I get out of my car because that's how big our campus is.
and so like I appreciate a kid who's willing to meet me like, yeah, go brush your teeth, like go pick up that lunch, go like, like, or I'll have a kid who's like, look, I had like my sibling goes to a different school, I gotta drop them off. Yo, dog, like put me on the dash, whatever you gotta do. Um, if it means that like you feel present here. And if you're still in bed, you still got the crusties in the eyeballs, like that's cool too. Like, but let me know that you're here. Reese Doobie try to go
Yeah,
other.
gotta get a workout in.
I gotta get a workout in.
Yeah. I think the
Gotta get a
irony
workout.
of Luna pulling up to ask a question about the syllabus is the like the subtle underbelly of why we call this office hours, because that's literally what you would do if this were an office hour. You'd be like, excuse me, I have a question about the syllabus, um, and that's what it's for.
Mm-hmm.
I think this topic lends itself to the last topic. You know, the
Yeah.
feelings that students
Yeah.
have
Take a
about
sip.
their day to day and the things they're dealing with at home, and what they have to sacrifice in order to make their education work
Mm-hmm.
is something I've heard from a lot of my students. They submit journal entries every week, and
Yeah.
sometimes they're really mundane, and sometimes they're very kind of surface level and short. They're like, I had exams this week, shit was crazy, whatever. Sometimes like one of my students, we started watching The Social Dilemma.
Hold up. Let me answer
Go
this
ahead.
question real quick. Um, what was the deadline today or yesterday? I don't know anymore.
Who keeps track of these things? Certainly not me.
Um, Today, is that true? I mean, I believe you. Oh yeah, today's Monday.
Deadline on a
Jesus
Monday?
Christ. Um, yeah, because I have them. They're finishing a reading for Wednesday, so I had to stagger my deadline.
I see.
Um, if it were yes, so tomorrow at 1 would warrant 5% deduction. Correct.
So get cracking. Oh, I'm
I'm
good then.
good.
Okay. Oh man.
Confidence. Hey, sometimes you gotta do the calculus.
Yeah.
Yes, Luna, hustle. Look, I gotta say, like, I'd prefer a student just be honest and be like, listen, I got stuff on my plate. I need to finesse the policies right fast
Mm-hmm.
so I can meet my obligation. Than a kid who tries to pull a fast one, and then I'm like, okay, so now you've insulted my intelligence and you failed at finessing. But like Luna got it like that.
Yeah. No,
Like,
no.
you know
I
what I'm saying? Like, hey,
I
look,
I
time to
agree.
keep holding our paper. Like,
I
you
agree.
gotta do what
I'd
you gotta
rather
do.
you let me know than not.
Right,
And I stress that. I'm like, please
right,
just tell me what's happening, and I will be able to help you. Because I
right.
have had so many students in the last few years, um, who hit me up, when grades are due, and they're like, "Oh, I was dealing with all this shit," and I'm like, "I don't care. It's too late. I don't care now. I would have cared if you told me when it started. I would have been very empathetic. I would have been like, oh, that is awful. How can I
Mhm.
help you?" Right? But when you tell
And
me, especially because end semester is on my birthday, for my birthday this year, the last day of classes for me, technically, my students will be
rough.
turning in their papers as a birthday gift to me. I told them I don't like late gifts. I don't like surprises. Turn your shit in on time.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I'm willing to bend when I can, but if you're gonna insult my intelligence, then you're gonna catch a L. And there's nothing I can do about it because you set that shit up.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. My thing has always been like, I will match your energy. Like I got an email from a kid um yesterday who was like, look, Reese, I just got back from a big showcase. My body's really banged up, like really banged up. I just want to get food in my belly. I want to like ice up, tape up, and that's gonna take me the day, man. Can I get 12 hours? And I'm like, yes, yeah, hell yeah, take 12 hours. Like you were playing your sport, you're trying to secure the bag with that D1 commit,
Mm-hmm.
and it's lacrosse, so you get banged up. Yeah,
No,
I would much rather like front load all of those conversations than have a kid hit me on the back end.
that's all it takes. It's all it takes.
All it takes.
And so I appreciate when students are open and honest. And I know what up, Ace.
What up,
Appreciate
Ace?
you being here.
Thanks, Yamasoda, bitch.
I appreciate when they're upfront and honest, and